So yeah, I did talk a little bit about Dr. Ron already, but I'll tell you the story when I first met him. I had already been reading. If you don't know, he's kind of famous for his research and stuff. He would never say that, of course. But I kind of knew about him already and was reading some of his stuff. And then he was doing a presentation at Wailuku Church one day. This was actually several years ago now. And I took my youth down there. About 12 of us, we were going to go hear the presentation. But of course, and anyone who's a teacher or in youth ministry knows, we were late. And so we missed like a good portion of Dr. Ron's presentation, and I was super bummed about it because I wanted the kids to learn, But he had wrapped up, and he was, valauing with a couple of the aunties, and everyone's always asking him questions. So we made our way out to the cemetery, and we were, walking through the cemetery, talking a little bit about William Richards. And then he walked over, and this is a little bit about Ron as a man. He left all of that group, and he came over there, and he spent the next hour talking with me and my kids and shared the whole presentation on a much more personal level with us right there in the shadow of Keopulani's memorial. So that was my introduction to Ron. And he's that guy. He's that guy that it's so important to him. It's so much a passion and a part of his life that every opportunity he has, he's willing to share what he knows. Even today, I just called him like 24 hours ago, messaged him and say, hey, could you come share with the kids? And of course, his answer was yes. So all to say, put your hands together and welcome my good friend, Dr. Ron Williams.
Aloha mai kākou. Aloha, aloha. O vau Ron, yeah. O Ron Williams Jr. ko inoa piha. He akavika I ka hale vaihone palapala vaihona pune o ka mokoaina Hawaiʻi. He mea kaukau vau. He malahini vau I kia ʻāina o Wailuku. Me the Mokupuni o Maui ko Hawaiʻi pai ʻāina. No laila e hoʻomaka vau I kuʻu moʻo kuau hau. Yeah. So I'm Ron Williams Jr. I'm a historian, first of all. I'm an archivist, but I have to make super clear, because this is how the state works, I'm not here today speaking for the archives. But I actually took a vacation day. but no, I just mean I'm just joking about how strict they are, Anyway, but so yes, that's who I am, and I moved to Maui in 1997. I moved to Lahaina in 1997. But I'm still malahini to this place. It's not my ʻāina, right? So my kumu have always taught me to start with your moʻokua, your genealogy, so I'll do that. Start with my familial genealogy, I'll make it short, and my academic genealogy, because I think that's important too. So you guys know who's talking to you, yeah? So again, my name is Ron Williams Jr., which means there's a Ron Williams Sr. That's my dad. My dad was born in Arkansas, where I grew up. Long line of hunters, fishermen, gardeners, planters, deer hunting, squirrel hunting, rabbit hunting. We grew up that way. So that's my dad. My mom was born in Chicago, Illinois, which is where I was born. Yeah. Her people come back from Montreal, Canada, and before that, France, Ireland, Wales, Czechoslovakia, and Norway. Yeah. So that's who I am. On the other end of my genealogy, I have a wonderful, incredible 24-year-old daughter I'm in love with. Kiele Makana Malie Williams is my daughter. She has 2 children. I have 2 mo'o already. Crazy, Nanea and Ha'o, Kamaha'o. So that's my daughter. So my academic genealogy is a little interesting, I think. I went to Damien High School in Laverne, California, right? But we had no idea who Damien was. They never told us. I just knew he was a priest, right? I came out to Hawaii and found out who Damien was. But I went to Damien High School in Laverne, California. I graduated in 1984, and I went to Brigham Young University in Provo, Utah. I had left home when I was 15, and I stayed with a Mormon family, and they sent me to school. Free school, I'll go, yeah. And it's a huge, it was the largest private school in the country, 45,000 students when I was there. The good thing I can say about my time there was we won the national championship in football. I don't know if anybody remembers that. Robbie Bosco and BYU beat Washington to win the national championship. But I didn't go to school much. I was there for 3 semesters. I took 6 classes a semester, and I passed 2 classes. Totally, right? It's nothing to be proud of. I'm not telling you that. I'm telling you that because 33 years old, I end up finding out what I wanted to do. I went back to school as a 12-year full-time student at UH and got my PhD, got my doctorate. Yeah? So you have to be ready for school. You have to have something you're passionate about. It's not about how smart you are. It's about finding out what you want to do and committing to it. Yeah? So that's what I finally did, and I'll tell you a little bit about that story. So what I'm going to talk to you about today is several things. The history of Lahaina. Yeah? Lahaina's become a very popular topic nowadays, as you can imagine. But the history of Lahaina, and not the 200-year history of Lahaina. My first kumu, Akoni Akana, he was the founder of the Friends of Moku, which was trying to bring back that sacred island that existed in Lahaina but now is covered over by a baseball field. He was working to bring that back, right? And he started this group called the Friends of Moku. He was my first kumu there in 1997 when I first came, the first few weeks that I came here. So we're going to talk about the Friends of Moku. We're going to talk about that sacred island, but more centrally, we're going to talk about Christianity in Hawaii. Now, admission here, or confession, I'm not Christian, I'm a Buddhist, right? Ka'eo kind of nodded to that, and the idea is I do come at this from a point of view not trying to promote or attack Christianity, but simply telling you what your kapuna wrote and said. Yeah? That's what I do. I don't interpret it, I don't tell you what they meant. I say, here's the words of your kapuna. And sometimes they're awesome stuff you want to hear, and sometimes they're not so awesome stuff you don't want to hear, but that's the history, and it's all there. Okay? So I want to talk to you for just a moment about that topic, which is called historiography. Okay? Historiography is just a fancy word that historians use to mean the process of the creation of history. Okay? When you see a book, it pretends like this is a history book. This is a history of Texas. Okay? It's history of Texas. This book, how the author got their information is their historiography. Okay? Now, every book ever produced is somewhat exclusive. They can't include everything. It's just too much. If you're writing a history of World War II, do you interview 40 million people? Of course not. So you choose who you interview. Sometimes people will purposely choose one group because they want to get a certain story. Sometimes they'll interview older folks and not younger. Or sometimes they'll interview white folks and not brown folks, or men and not women. There are all these different choices you make about who you ask. That becomes your book, and that becomes your historiography. So whenever we read a book, no matter who it's from, we have to understand that. We have to understand that it's in some ways exclusive, and we've got to wonder what was left out. Okay? So having said that, I can tell you I've been doing this for 25 years, Hawaiian history and Hawaiian language sources, and I can tell you absolutely that 95% or more of the histories ever produced about Hawaii come from about 6% of the population, right? Helen Chapin said that at the time of the overthrow in 1893, about 6% of the population was Haole English-speaking in Hawaii. 6%. And they've produced 95% of what you know about Hawaiian history. Now, my argument isn't that Haole sources lie and Hawaiian sources tell the truth. Not at all. My argument is that you've got a tiny part of the story. You've got all of this history, 95% of your history, from this little group. Missionaries, missionary wives, doctors, their wives, businessmen, and so forth. What about Hawaiians? Hawaiians wrote prolifically about their land, their lives, and their lahui. We've got 125,000 pages of Hawaiian language newspapers. 125,000 pages. And that's just newspapers. People talk about the newspapers quite a lot. We've also got an equal or larger amount of business letters, correspondences from the maka'ainana to the ali'i, from the ali'i back and forth and so forth. At the Hawaii State Archives where I work, we've got tens of thousands of letters, government documents, and so forth, Moʻolelo Hawaii, written in Hawaii, that no Haole historian who doesn't speak Hawaiian ever accessed. They're telling you those stories from what they know, and that's a tiny bit. There was a murder, and there's 10 witnesses. They've asked one witness, they've written the book, and they've walked away, right? So you have an incredible opportunity to learn and hear about and research yourself what your kapuna were saying about that day in Hilo in 1870, or that day in Makaha, or so forth. They wrote, and we have that access. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Okay? We're going to talk about Lahaina, we're going to talk about the 2,000-year history of Lahaina, and we're going to talk about what your kapuna said about Christianity. Okay? So I want to, before I forget, I brought makana, so I always try to bring makana. I have two. One is for Dr. Chun, of course. There we go. And the second one is for one of you who answer a quiz. So at the end of the talk, I'm going to ask a question, and any one of you can win this book. This was a 2019 Samuel Manai Kalani Kamakau Book of the Year. Now, the reason why I brought it, not for self-promotion, I do have an essay in there. But the reason why I brought it was specific, and that is because Heialoha Johnston was the curator of HOMA, the Museum of Art, at the time this was produced, and she produced this book. Why is that important? She was the first Native Hawaiian curator at HOMA, right? And when we talk about Native Hawaiians who have accomplished these types of things, we need to really support those folks and know about them and make them famous. Here you have a Native Hawaiian in charge of this incredibly wealthy, incredibly important, incredible central museum in Hawaii. She put on this exhibition called Ho'oulu Hawaii, the King Kalakaua era, that was the first time the museum had ever looked at Hawaiians from a Hawaiian point of view. Yeah? Now she's not with the museum anymore, she's at Bishop Museum now. But again, folks like her and many other Kanaka who are achieving these things, we all need to be supporting them. Okay? So, if you listen up, you might be able to win this book at the end of the day. Okay. Moku'ula, Mokuhinia, Luaehu, and Ka'aklesia o Lahaina. Now, when I start to talk about these things, I want to tell you another thing. I'm going to tell you, again, what your kapuna said, good, bad, and ugly. I'm going to tell you the truth. How do you know that? You know that because every single document in this presentation, there's a bunch of them, every single document in here, every single photograph has a citation that leads you to that original piece of paper, right? When you read the newspaper, when you read that book, when you hear something on Facebook, when you hear something on social media, you believe it or not, who knows? Primary sources are documents from the actual event by somebody that was there. So when I tell you so-and-so was baptized in 1823, you can come in the archives and I can show you the baptismal certificate. I don't publish or write anything that I haven't found a primary source for, right? And that's super important because we're starting to take seriously what we say. Did your kapuna do that? Of course they did. Ika'olelo keola, ika'olelo kamake. In language there's life, in language there's death. That's how serious it was. And what that meant was literal, right? When you told somebody in the morning, hey, have a good day, you were literally affecting the universe to help them have a good day. And vice versa, when you told somebody something awful, you're hurting them, right? So we need to be aware of what we're saying. The way we can always speak the truth is to look for those primary sources, okay? So some of them I'm going to share with you today. Pohaku Hau'ola, which is the birthing stone in Lahaina of many great ali'i. Kihavahine, right? Mo'o goddess. Keopuolani. Now we have no photographs or images of Keopuolani, so this is a painting by Brooke Parker, right? Brooke Parker. So this is, an imagination of what she looked like. This is a diary from two Tahitians I'm going to talk about, Toketa. This is Nahiena, the first constitution of the nation of Hawaii. There's a map of the cemetery and the church, and there's the church as it was about 2 months ago. Okay, let's move on. I want to dedicate the talk today to a few folks. The first one is this Akoni Akana, my first kumu. So why is this skinny howly farmer boy up here talking about Hawaii? Well, when I first moved here, I knew it wasn't my place. I was visiting someone else's lands, right? And so I wanted to learn a little bit. And one day I was working at Pacifico Restaurant on 505 Front Street. That's my first job. I'd been here like 3 weeks. And I look over and I saw this guy. I thought he was a haole guy because he's skinny and he had red hair, right? But he's Hawaiian Portuguese. And he was in a kihei and he's chanting. And I was like, oh, I heard about chanting, whatever. So I kind of went over and I was looking at him. So he goes, come here. I went over and I talked to him for an hour or so. And he said, hey, tomorrow, come upstairs. I'm in my office, yeah? And that was Kumu Akoni Akana. One of the most brilliant men I've ever met, one of the most knowledgeable men about Maui I've ever met. He took me under his wing, taught me language, taught me history, and trained me to do those tours of Lahaina that they were doing for their group that was raising money to bring back Moku'ula. So myself, George Ka'imiola, who passed away last year, and 2 others were trained to do that 2,000-year history of Lahaina by our Kumu Akoni Akana. He passed from diabetes way early, way too early, and the Friends of Moku'ula turned to his right-hand woman, which was Shirley Kaha'i here. That's me with really bad hair and a really ugly shirt. I didn't mention I had here on this one, right? But there's me and Shirley. Shirley took over, and unfortunately, she was only on the job about 6 months when she passed. So a lot of things going on there at Friends of Moku'ula. And then finally, another of my kumu, Tama Kaleleiki, he was named a treasurer of Hawaii about 3 years ago by the Hawaiian Historical Society. He knows more about traditional Hawaiian burials than anybody alive, I believe. He is in charge of Nakia'io Waine'e, who is the group that takes care of the Royal Cemetery at Waine'e. Some of the most important burials, rivaling Mauna Ala. Right? You're talking about Keopuolani, Ho'opili Wahine, Ho'opili Kane, and those folks are all buried there in Lahaina. He's in charge of he has the kuleana for the burials. He has for over 50 years. He, in the 50s and 60s and 70s, went out by himself every day and watered and took care of it. And there's no plumbing, took care of them, made sure they were taken care of. He has been dealing with I think, stage 3 cancer for about 7 years now, and still is out there every Saturday when he doesn't have chemotherapy. He's out there watering, and now he's got some help. He's got a group that's working with him. But an incredible man that I met years ago, the man who gave me my Hawaiian name, Tamalali Kaleleiki. So I mahalo him. I was really scared, just a personal note, I was terrified when the fire happened because he lives in the Hale Kahu on the grounds of the church. And then you saw the picture of the church, just completely devastated. And I knew he was having his chemotherapy, and I thought, I've gone over there before because I always stay with him when I go to Lahaina. And I've gone to his house before. He doesn't lock the door. His dogs go crazy, and you walk in, and I had to wake him up. He still didn't hear me, So and I surprised him. He's like, oh, hilinai. But so I was worried. I finally got a hold of him in Kihei, and he said a neighbor he doesn't even know was pounding and pounding, pounding until he woke up. He said he walked outside. He said I looked and I saw the church. He said, and it was completely engulfed. And he said the wind was on fire. He said it wasn't pieces of ash in the wind. He said it was an 80-mile-an-hour wind and the wind was on fire. But he escaped. He escaped to Kihei, and his place survived. His place, the cemetery, and the high Hawaiʻi are the 3 things that survived. Hale Keopuolani and the church burned to the ground. Okay. So let's get into the history, yeah? This is Moku'ula. You might have heard of Moku'ula. Moku'ula was a central place of governance, of spirituality, of economics for all of Hawaii for hundreds and hundreds of years, right? This is an artist recreation of what it probably looked like. This is Front Street in Lahaina, and then here's the ocean. This was an inland fish pond, which was very popular, an inland fish pond about 100 yards off the shores called Mokuhinia, 17-acre fish pond that served the royalty. Pi'ilani, one of the great chiefs of Maui. Pi'ilani in the 16th century lived at this site and passed it down and so forth. Kauikioli, Kamehameha III, spent most of his time here at Moku'ula, right? So we'll talk about that quite a bit in a minute. I want to talk about the importance of names. When we talk about a place, we don't just say we're from Waimea, right? Where is that? And where is that? And so forth. Again, every time we speak the name of these places, we're giving mana to that place name. So when we're talking about Moku'ula, we say Moku'ula, Ikamalu ulu olele, in the breadfruit shade of Lele, which is an old name for Lahaina. Ina ahupua o waine'e ame waiokama. So we've said our place. Now we're talking about the ahupua. This is really interesting because it divides 2 ahupua. We've always thought of the ahupua borders as being important. They are, but in Lahaina they're all messed up. Why? Because this spot was so sacred that the mana emanated out in concentric circles from it. And this goes across 2 different ahupua, Waine'e and Waiokama. Yeah? So you'll see this at Moku'ula. So those are the ahupua. Ika Moku'ula Lahaina in the district of Lahaina, right? Ika Mokupuni o Maui in the island of Maui, ko Hawaii pai ʻāina. So when we're talking about Moku'ula, we say Moku'ula, ika malu ulu o Lele, ina ahupua o Waine'e a mai Waiokama, ika Moku o Lahaina, ika Mokupuni o Maui, ko Hawaii pai ʻāina. That's how we give mana to that place, right? Okay. I should note the Lahaina. There's a really big and vicious, I shouldn't say that. There's a very big and important discussion going on about how to spell Lahaina. Until this presentation, and I'm not changing, I have always used both kahako, and I'll tell you why I've done that. Number 1, most importantly, my kumu taught me that way. And I was always taught your kumu is right. So, and it's okay to have different ideas and different opinions, right? Not all knowledge is with one halau. Esther Moakini, really famous worker for Bishop Museum. Esther Moakini, quoted saying, yes, it is Lahaina with 2, meaning unrelenting sun with 2 diacriticals. Pia Kaket, who's a longtime resident of Maui, Kupuna in the 19th century, she said it was Lahaina with 2 kahako. But Dr. Puakea Nogomeyer, who was my kumu and who knows 1,000 times more about language than I do, which most people do. I mean, I'm fluent in Hawaiian, but my Hawaiian, I'm not the one to follow. But so Puakea guys and Kau'i, and now my old kumu up at KS Maui, Kapolani Antonio and her husband Lokahi Antonio, they are both very strongly coming out with the understanding that it doesn't have any kako. And they say, well, no living Manoleo says it that way. And Puakea, who's listened to more Manoleo than anyone alive, says, I've never heard anyone pronounce it that way, right? So my kuleana, I have to publish and I have to make a choice. So my kuleana has always been to my first kumu. Now, learning more information, I've taken it off for this presentation and I have to sit and think about it and think about how I'm going to move forward. But yes, there is a strong argument for the fact that it doesn't have diacriticals. If somebody's thinking about, well, what should I do? I would say follow your komu, and then listen to the discussion and make up your decision, right? But so to be honest, I don't know. My understanding was always that it was unrelenting sun, but there's many folks who know more about language than I do who are now saying it doesn't get any diacriticals. Okay? Okay. Lahaina kamalu ulolele. So, Mrs. Pakui said, kahuna kuhi kuhi pu'u one, architects. You know, there was no this, things weren't 100% different prior to the arrival of foreigners. Hawaiians had a lot of the same things we have today, they just called them something else. Kuhuna kuhi kuhi pu'u one were folks who told the li'i where to build stuff. So they would say, they'd walk around the land for a while, they'd walk around and they'd say, okay, you need to put this hale right here. And the king would put it right there, because they know. Now, part of that could be spiritual, part of that could be they were hearing from Keakua or something, and they said, but also much of that came from the fact that their families knew that land, that was their job. They were geographers. The information, the knowledge about the winds and the rains in that land came down through their family for hundreds and hundreds of years. So there's this practical ability of Kanaka Oiwi in that time period, knowing the land, living there for 2,000 years. I'll tell you a quick little story. The church at Lahaina, first church on Maui. The first one that went up, there were kupuna that came together with Keopuolani and the haole priests and so forth, and they said, we're going to build a church in Lahaina. And the haole started to build it, and the kupuna said, wait, and they said, no, we're from Boston, we know how to build houses, we know how to do this. And they built the church, and it blew down. And I thought, okay, so they built it a little stronger, and it blew down again. And they came to the kupuna, and they said, what were you saying about that thing? And they said, you can't build it there. The Kaua'ula winds come down from Kaua'ula Valley right through here about every 7 years and wipe out everything. You got to put it over here and you got to turn it into the wind. Kanaka knew their own place, right? They knew these things. And so people like Kuhuna Kuhi Kuhi Pu'uone did that for this area of Lahaina. Okay. Paul Christian Klieger, who wrote a book about Moku'ula, said Moku'ula is an axis mundi in the Hawaiian world, a central place for everything, right? A central place for everything. He wahi kalai ʻāina, so a governmental place. He wahi mana, a spiritual place. He wahi oihana kalepa, a place of economics. Everything in the kingdom, not everything, but a lot of the whalers, all that stuff, the money, all that kind of stuff was coming through Lahaina. So Lahaina i ka wa uiwi vale. I use that term wa uiwi vale to replace what many people call pre-contact or before cook, right? My kumu, Kanalu Young at Kamakukuokalani, before he passed, he made that point to me. He came up with this term and he said, we don't need to keep centralizing Captain Cook. That period before he got here, he came up with the term native only. Va, era, oiwi vale. The era of native only. So I like to use that term instead of pre-contact or post or pre-cook or so forth. But Lahaina, in the time before that, Ikaoiwi Vale, Lele Lahaina served as a site for the courts of Kaka'alaneo, Kakai, Kahekili the Kahi, Pi'ilani, and others. It was a place of abundance where freshwater springs combined with streams from the nearby mountains flowing Makai to create local Ia, Alawai, a local Lo'ikalo. Yeah? Now I came to Lahaina in 1997. I was surfing, I was having a job, I worked at Luau, it was hot. It was hot and there ain't no water in sight, right? But there used to be. There used to be dozens of streams coming down the mountains into Lahaina. Lahaina was one of the most verdant green places in all of the islands. In the 1870s and 80s and 90s, all of those streams were diverted to feed the sugarcane fields. And the water didn't make it down into Lahaina. And now Lahaina is bone dry. But let's look at what it was from people that talked about it before that. Oop. Okay, so, Lahaina Ika'iwi Vale. Hewahi Mana, a spiritual place. This is Pohaku Ha'ola. Mrs. Bakui talks about it. Okoni took me there. This is the rock, literal rock, that's just outside the wharf where the library used to be. I hate saying that. Library used to be. And King Kamehameha, the first kalo field is. There's this Pohaku about 8 or 10 feet off the shore. And during low tide, it sits up like that. And the Mo'olelo is the ali'i wahine would sit there held by protectors, and this is where they give birth to the highest ali'i, on that stone. So many famous ali'i born there at Pohaku Ha'ola and Lahaina. Hewahi Mana, again, a spiritual place. So also born on that stone was Kihavahine Mokohinia Kalama'ula Kala'ai Heana, right? Who was a daughter of Pi'ilani. Now let me make sure I didn't miss something here. 1 second, sorry. Yeah. Oh yeah, okay. Okay, so Pi'ilani, the chief Pi'ilani in the 16th century, the most powerful man on Maui, right? He has 3 kids, yeah? Lonoa Pi'ilani, Kiha'a Pi'ilani, and Kala'aiheana. Kala'aiheana is born E'epa. Now, E'epa Moʻolelo Hawaiʻi means different. Something's different about their shape. Something's different about them, so forth. Some people say deformed, but that's not correct. But it's something about them is different, right? And Hawaiians took that to mean that this person was special, that they were to be regarded in a certain light and so forth. And so when she passes at age 19 or 20, around that time period, Kala'aiheana, the physical woman, is taken, her body is buried at Moku'ula, at that sacred fish pond. There's ceremonies performed, and they say they brought her back as Kihavahine, this Mo'o goddess, right? And so she was a protector of Lahaina, one of the most important protectors of Lahaina. I'm going to tell you how she helped Kamehameha in a second. This is actually a photograph of the only known ki'i in the world representing her. The only one. 24 inches tall. It sits in a museum in Berlin, an ethnology museum. It was discovered, and I'll tell you the story of its discovery. This was found, and this photograph was taken in 1884 after Dr. Arning, a German bacteriologist, acquired it. So what happened was, and so she sits today in a museum in Berlin. When I worked at Bishop Museum, there was a gentleman who was the head of the Australian National Museum who was doing an exhibition on gods of Oceania. And he said he wanted to know about her. They asked me to sit and talk with him, so I talked to him about it. He took pictures for me that I'm going to share with you in a second, color pictures of her today. But in the accession files of the museum, this isn't just a story, this is what the accession files say, and that is, in 1883, Hawaiians in Lapahoehoe'iki, Big Island, Hawaii Island, were digging a hole to make Okolehau, right? They were going to put a still and make Okolehau. They were digging a hole out there, and it was a place you had to swim to and come up on. It was really tough to get to, and they discovered this ki'i. Now, it could have been buried there 1819 when Ka'ahumanu says, let's burn all the ki'i. We don't know. Sometime after that, it was buried and hidden. It's discovered in 1883. In the accession files, it says the Hawaiians brought it into town, and everybody broke out with sores on their faces and mouths. And so the kahuna said, put it back. And so they did. They put it back. But Arning heard about it in Honolulu. He hired other Hawaiians to go get it again, and he got it himself. Now, really important to note, and I told you I'm going to tell you the whole truth, Kalakaua allowed Arning to take it back to Germany. Kalakaua had a collection himself, and he would trade and so forth like that. And so he allowed Arning to take it back to Germany, so it wasn't stolen. But there are folks, Noel Kahanu and many others who are doing repatriations right now, who are literally, as we speak, working on bringing her back to Hawaii, making the argument that it's a moral argument, that she belongs in Hawaii. The German Museum, I've seen the pictures, it says like Hawaiian God. That's all they know about it. And she's an incredibly important akua. So that's being worked on today. This picture was of an exhibit that Dr. Arning put up in Honolulu and said, these are all my things I have. He had skulls and everything. It was really awful. But this is one of the pictures from there. And you'll notice she's missing her mother of pearl eyes and she's missing some teeth, right? Well, in the photo from last year that I was given, so I'm sorry. So let's note this. So she was an ancestor of Keopuolani. Because remember, she's that woman, right? Kala'aiheana, daughter of Pi'ilani, comes down eventually to Keopuolani, which means she's one of the akua that Keopuolani is in charge of. Keopuolani, the most important and powerful woman in the kingdom, maybe person in the kingdom, right? So she's an ancestor of her. She's a nation-building deity. All the deity had different kuleana, right? So let's talk about this other history that I learned 20 years ago, which was there were 4 main gods in Hawaii, yeah? Kane, Lono, Kanaloa, and Ku, right? 4 main gods. Is Pele a main god? If you're talking about their gods? Yeah. Is Kihavahine? Of course. Did they bow to any male god? No. Why don't we know as much about them? Because all of the historians we've taken the history from were men who didn't go in the woman's heiau, who didn't prepare stuff for the women deity and so forth. There were deity like Kihavahine, like Pele, that were subservient to no other akua, and I'm talking about it in the past, and they need to be recognized. So she was a nation-building deity. When Kamehameha, right, everyone knows Kamehameha the First, his genealogy was a middle to middle high-ranking genealogy, right? Samuel Kamakau calls him a li'ilepo popolo, right? But he raised his mana using one of 2 ways. In Hawaii, you raise your mana by ku, the god of war, you're a great soldier, or by lono, procreation, you marry somebody a lot higher than you, right? You have children with somebody a lot higher than you. So Kamehameha does the coup thing, and he's awesome at it. And he becomes the king of all of Hawaii. But there's no way his kids are going to be allowed to reign unless he does something, because there are lots of higher genealogies out there. There's going to be warfare. It's going to be a mess. So along the way, before he unites the islands, he does the smartest thing in the world, and that is when he comes to Maui and battles at Iao Valley, and he finishes that up, he doesn't take over Maui completely because a war breaks out back home, but he goes up to the place where you guys are going, the heiau, and he says to the caretakers of the heiau, I want Keopuolani. She's the one who's going to give my kids that genealogy that will allow me to create a Kamehameha dynasty and rule, right? And Keopuolani, her ancestor is Keawahine, the nation-building deity. So yes, Kamehameha conquered the islands from Kukailimoku, but he created a dynasty by using Keawahine, the goddess that he got from Keopuolani. Yeah? Now she doesn't, just to give you the story, she runs away and hides on Molokai. He goes over there and follows her. Her auntie over there says, you can have her, but not yet, she's too young. And eventually we'll send Keopuolani to Kamehameha, and that will create that dynasty through Keawahine. Okay? So Keawahine, that is a picture from last year of the statue. And if you'll notice quite clearly, she now has eyes and all of her teeth, which begs the question, who in the world felt the kuleana to add eyes and teeth to this ki'i? But somebody did along the way. But that's her today. And there's a couple of other pictures of her today. I asked Auntie Pat Bacon, Mrs. Pukui's daughter, and many others that I've met at the museum and so forth, and they said there's never been a ki'i with this angle, sitting like this. And I asked what it, and the only mana'o they would share was Auntie Pat said she thought it might have to do with birthing, because a woman would do that during birthing. But she's kneeling like that. She had hair on her kohe here. She had hair on her head, right, originally. And that's the deity that Kamehameha used to raise his genealogy. And she lived at Moku'ula. Okay, so this is the fish pond of Keawahine. There are caretakers of her throughout time, including David Malo was one of her caretakers at the pond. Yeah. 17 acres at the center of Lahaina. So Lahaina from the eyes of the haole. When the haole arrive and talk about Lahaina, remember I told you it was green before? Well, let's get their words on it. Archibald Menzies, who was the botanist aboard Cook's voyage, Vancouver's voyage, says, even the shelving cliffs of rocks were planted with esculent roots, banked in and watered by aqueducts from the rivulets with as much art as if their level had been taken by the most ingenious engineer. We could not but indeed admire the laudable ingenuity of these people in cultivating their soil with so much economy. The indefatigable labor in making these little fields in so rugged a situation, the care and industry with which they were transplanted, watered, and kept in order surpassed anything of the kind we have ever seen before. There's a haole botanist saying your kupuna did agriculture better than anything we've ever seen before. Right? That's what we have to remember when we think about modernity and progress and these types of things. They fed 1 million people back then with the land that we have. And today we import 90% of our food. So things like that, this is a primary source giving you, this isn't me saying it, this is a primary source telling you how your kupuna were as agriculturists. Another one. Jack Arago, who was a Russian who came here in 1823, said the environs of Lahaina are like a garden. It would be difficult to find a soil more fertile or a people who could turn it to greater advantage. And then Reverend William Richards in 1823, when he arrives, the settlement is far more beautiful than any place we have yet seen on the islands. The entire district, stretching nearly 3 miles along the seaside, is covered with luxuriant groves, not only of the coconut, but also of the breadfruit and the ko, while the banana plant, kapa, and sugarcane are abundant and extended almost to the beach. Just a food pantry, right? And then go offshore a little bit, and what's that? Kapapalimu o Pialani, the limu table of Pialani, where he gathered fish and mussels and clams and lobster and all that stuff, right? So all the food of Lahaina, abundant. Foreigners arrived in 1778. From then to 1820, we see mass death from disease introduced. And I'm telling you right now, as a historian, 1820 to 1860, the primary question on your kupuna's mind was, how do we stay alive? People were dying literally by the tens of thousands. Imagine if we did this every year. We came back here every year and met. And next year we came back and there were 7 of you who had passed away. And next year we came back and there was 12. And next year there's 20. Like the rest of us are going, what's going on, right? That was the situation that Kanaka Oiwi faced in the mid-19th century. So what'd they do? I want to mention this when I inserted this slide this morning because I thought about, one of your themes here today is messengers of Christ. Raise your hand if you know about Opukahia. You've heard about him. Okay. Raise your hand if you've heard of Toketa. Couple, okay. Opukahia was the Hawaiian who went back east and was instrumental in bringing Christianity to Hawaii. All praise. That's an incredible story. Keopuolani, another incredible story, right? William Richards, another incredible story about bringing Christianity to Hawaii. The mission from the ABCFM. Their descendants will give you tons of stories about what a great job they did in bringing Christianity to Hawaii, and they did. But there were people that brought the Word of God here prior to the missionaries ever arriving, and they were your cousins in Tahiti and Bora Bora and so forth. This, believe it or not, is a journal. Now this is one you guys, I was going to say a bar fight, but you're not doing that. This is something you can win a bet from your friends, and that is what was the first recorded journal written in Hawaiian ever? So Hawaiian language, right, comes in 1820, supposedly, from the missionaries, and people start writing and learning how to write. So what Hawaiian wrote the first journal ever in Hawaiian? It was a Tahitian. Toketa was a Tahitian Christian who was missionized by William Ellis in Tahiti. William Ellis went to Tahiti in 1817 and Christianized Tahiti. Not all of it, but Christianized some people in Tahiti. In 1818, 2 years before the missionaries ever arrived here, Toketa, the Tahitian, arrives in Hawaii, becomes fluent in Hawaiian in about, they say an hour, but I'm gonna say that's a little, maybe a day or a week. And he writes Moʻolelo Hawaii, the first journal ever recorded in Hawaii. 1819, he starts his trials. Again, the missionaries haven't even arrived with the alphabet and blah, 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 blah. So it was your Tahitian cousins who brought the message of Christ to Hawaii. And think about this, Keopuolani, nothing would have happened without her. If she's not on board, no chance, right? When she sees Toketa, the Tahitian, and Taua, the Tahitian, and others, Aunu, other Tahitians, and they come talk to her about this thing, she trusts them. They're her cousins, and so forth. That's different than this person of a color you've never seen who's come 6,000 miles and so forth. And yes, she ended up trusting the missionaries, but we know that she, of course, trusted her cousins and listened to them, which was an opening to the missionaries to arrive in 1820, right? So a very important part of that story that was left out about the message of coming here. Historical accounts, contemporary life, and some kahuna lapa'au in the Sandwich Islands. Just something kind of funny I'll point out. Whoever created this title in the 1860s or 70s of the book said, by Toketa of Bora Bora and Kahikona of Norway. Because they couldn't understand the Tahitian island the person had written, and so they made it out as Norway. But no, he didn't come from Norway. 1815, London Marriage Missionary Society in Tahiti. 1818, Toketa travels to Hawaii. Reverend Ellis is placed in the household of Governor Kuakini, learns Olelo Hawaii, and begins a journal. 1819, overthrow of the Kapu system. 1822, accompanies Ka'ahumanu and Kamuali'i on a trip around Hawaii Island. Writes letter of 8 February for Kuakini to Reverend Hiram Bingham. He had a school. Toketa ran a school of 80 students, teaching them Christianity. Yeah? Okay. So Keopuolani. He Wahimana, again, a place of spirituality. So Keopuolani is in Honolulu, 1823. Kamehameha has united all the islands. Things are going good. Now we're in charge. We're doing this, we're doing that. And she starts missing home. She's a Maui girl, right? She wants to come back to Maui. So on May 28th, 1823, she says, we're going to go to Maui, and I'm going to set up a mission in Maui, a Christian mission in Maui. And she brings along Taua, her Tahitian. She brings along Reverend William Richards and his wife Clarissa, Reverend Stewart and his wife, and Betsy Stockton, the former American slave. And she brings that kui over to Maui. Now, one interesting fact, they didn't have motors in their boats, right? They're depending on the wind. I thought, well, yeah, it probably takes them, 8 hours? It took them 3 days to get from Oahu to Maui. There's no more wind that day, right? So they leave on the 28th. On May 31st, 1823, Keopuolani and company arrive on the shores of Lahaina at Uo Beach, which right now is where the harbors are, right? They arrive right there on the beach, and they hold the first Christian service on Maui. Yeah? And again, if it's Keopuolani, that means everybody's coming. Right? You hear about it, you're going to go. So they estimate about 300 to 400 people had gathered, because they didn't announce it, had already gathered on the beach. They held a Christian service there. She directs them to erect a church, like a temporary church. So across the street and down just a tiny bit where the Baldwin home is today, in that area, was the first kind of thatched church in Lahaina, days later. And I'll give you that timeline here. So I was looking, and many others, Dr. David Forbes and many others were looking for this book for decades, and we couldn't find it, and it came one day. Yeah, I remember, and David was so angry that I found it. But we were in the Hawaiian mission houses, right? And I was the president of the Hawaiian Historical Society, which is the same room, right? Where we share a room. And so I got, able to go back in their stuff and look around and stuff like that. And they have a bunch of stuff that's not cataloged yet. And in one box was a book. We assumed that it was burned. So 1894, Lahaina Wailuku Church burned to the ground. Wailuku Church burned to the ground in 1894. We assumed that the book was lost then. But what happened, we found out, was in 1893, the book had been taken over to the courthouse because there was a court hearing about Lahaina Church, and it was stored there. And then Dr. Lydecker, who was the early territorial archivist, brought it from the courthouse to Hawaiian mission homes and gave it to them. They just never cataloged it. So I found, this is the original church records book of Keopuolani Church in 1823. And it says, records of the church at Lahaina, Maui, from its commencement, 1823. And it says, this is the first page here. And it says, on the 31st of May, 1823, the following members of the Sandwich Islands Church took up their residence in Lahaina, where by administering the ordinances, communing together, exercising discipline, etc., they to a certain extent constituted a separate church. Charles Stewart, Harriet B. Stewart, William Richards, Clarissa Richards, Betsy Stockton, William Kamaula, and Kau'a. This is the first 7 members of Wailuku Church. And Wailuku Church was founded on May 31st, 1823, which means we just had their 200th anniversary. I was privileged to speak at their 200th anniversary and bring a lot of this history back. It is digitized, so it wasn't all lost. But this was just this May. This is another incredible find, thing that came to us. Was no pictures of the church ever. And so this is in that period. This was discovered also at Hawaiian mission houses, uncatalogued. And this is a glass plate negative, right? Daguerreotype, and then it became a daguerreotype of somebody taking a picture from Front Street. This is one of the first photographs ever taken in Hawaii. It's circa 1853-54. And it's from Front Street looking back. So you get the church there, the first time we ever saw a picture of the church. But not only that, what was on the Makai side of the church? Moku'ula. This is a photograph of Moku'ula. Here's the walls of the fish pond. Akone, never got to see this, but we've all imagined what it would be like. That's a photograph of Moku'ula. Moku'ula, the waters of Moku'ula went up right against the back of the church, and then over on the cemetery side, it was all lo'i, right? But from there to what was Mo'i, Alanui Mo'i, right? It wasn't called Front Street back then. It was called Alanui Mo'i. All the way up to there was water. There was a little 1-acre island within the inland fish pond. They would take their canoes from that little island over like this to the steps of the church and go to church on Sunday. There's actually a Moʻolelo in the newspapers in 1863 from one of the ali'i that talks about the story of that she was in the canoe going like this, and the canoe went flying up in the air and she almost drowned, and it was the mo'o angry she was going to the Christian church, yeah. but it was all these kind of stories come about that pond. Yeah? So that's an actual photograph of Moku'ula. This is a map. So here's the church, right? Now, so the church, that first church I mentioned was over there. The thatched church was over there by the Baldwin House. In 1828, Ho'opili Kane, yeah, Ulumahehe Ho'opili, he is governor of Maui, close friend of Kamehameha I, very important guy, owns a lot of land. He donates this land to Keopuolani's church, right, to build this new church. Now, Keopuolani has been baptized on her deathbed in 1823, September 6th, right, or September 26th. Okay? So she has become a member of the church just before her passing, and the first Christian baptism of that mission. A lot of people say, and I hear it all the time, Keopuolani was the first baptism in Hawaii. It's not true. Yeah. The first baptism in Hawaii was Kalai Moku in 1819, who was a chief, who was baptized aboard the French ship. He was baptized Catholic. Yeah? So that was the first baptism in Hawaii. Keopolani is the first Christian of that mission. Yeah? Okay, so there's the church. Here's the cemetery, right? And there's, to show you how much they cared about their ulula'au, there's a mark that says, this is the breadfruit tree, blah, 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 named Lono'apilani, and so forth. Okay, so I want to start talking a little bit about economics and government, stuff like that, in Lahaina. I've been through thousands and thousands of legal documents in Hawaii. We've got the first laws. Actually, you can go in and see the first laws. You can see what they said. There's also this law, and it's the only law I've ever seen declared that wasn't signed by the mo'i and the konehiki, the ko-mo'i. It's signed by Nahiena, which is super interesting. It means Nahiena, the daughter of Keopolani, had the power of law in Lahaina, right? No ke ku'ai. This is a whole declaration about the market in Lahaina and how you should behave yourself and how you should sell things and so forth. And it talks about concerning commerce. I forbid overcharging, underselling, illicit commerce, greediness, da-da-da-da-da-da. I forbid women from going to the market. Sorry. The purpose of but so this is Nahiena having that kuleana of declaring law in Lahaina. Again, because she has that connection to Keopolani and the Mo'o. That was November 5th, 1833. Okay, so then we're going to get to this, my favorite piece. So remember I talked to you about death from disease? People are dying, people are dying. One answer that was being brought by the foreigners was this idea of olaho, everlasting life, from becoming Christian. But we have to understand your kupuna of the time they were in, right? As almost every other person in the world, if you've been doing something for 2,000 years, you trust it. So there were some ali'i who were saying, we've been building your churches and so forth and we're still dying. What about our traditional answer, which was to have a ni'aupio mating, an incestuous mating that would create a nuakua powerful enough to fix this problem? They've been doing it in Hawaii for 2,000 years. They've been doing it in Polynesia for 10,000 years. It made sense. So they decide to try to have this union that will create a new god that will be powerful enough to solve the problem. And they need to do something special to do it. So they create the pa'u of Nahiena, the largest piece of featherwork in the world. Now you've seen feather capes, right? Of the ali'i and so forth. Those are 7 feet long, right? This originally, now it's been altered. This seam you see here, it was where it was cut. It was originally, this piece was flipped around here. So it would look like that picture up there. And this pa'u of Nahiena was 20 feet long by 2.5 feet wide. Largest piece of featherwork in the world. 20 feet long, 2.5 feet wide, almost all o'o feathers. The o'o bird is a black bird that has 8 to 12 feathers. How good's your math? What's 12 divided by a million, or a million divided by 12? It was hundreds of thousands of birds. No, they didn't kill them. Hundreds of thousands of birds. So this isn't a small thing. They're doing this as a national project, and they're starting it in Lahaina. We've got to create this thing. And we're not going to just build her a cape. We're going to build her the largest piece of featherwork in the world. And why not an aha'ula? We don't know for sure. My mana'o and my ike, and Dr. Charlot and some others have said it also since then, is that they were glorifying her ma'i, her ability to procreate, by creating a pa'u for her. And this will bring forth that god. So they create this 20-foot by 2.5-foot pa'u. They give it to Nahiena. She is supposed to be with Liho, but he dies in London. So now she's supposed to be with Kauikeoli, Kamehameha III, right? Kamehameha III is on board for this, and she's kind of not, because she's been growing up in that church at Waine'e, and Reverend Baldwin is saying, or Reverend Stewart is saying, no way, don't do this, don't do this. The mission actually marries her off to a ali'i to try to prevent her from doing this, but she doesn't know, she's stuck. She doesn't know what to do. My ali'i are telling me this is the way we used to do it, this is the way I'm supposed to do it, I don't know. She ends up going and being with her brother, and her brother literally sends out a crier throughout town, because that's how you announce news back then. And he says, a child will come in 9 months from Nahiena and Kauikeoli, because he wanted people to know when it came it was his child. And sure enough, a baby was born to them on September 17th, 1826. I'm sorry, 1836. The baby lasted 2 hours old and passed. She passes 3 months later. Nahiena passes from complications from giving birth. Her body is taken by Kauikeoli to his palace at Haleoluhe near Queen's Hospital. Yeah? And he won't bury her because he doesn't want to be parted from her. Hawaiians had methods of preservation. She died on December 30th. On February 4th, he had a funeral for her at Kamehameha Church, where the church is, and then he finished it up and brought her back to his house. He refused to bury her until he could bring her to her mother, who was at Mokuʻula. Right? Keopuolani was buried at Mokuʻula. So he buys a ship called the Don Quixote in 1837 in April. He buys a ship and he sails this ship over just for her funeral. He lands at Malo Wharf, and Moʻolelo, in the newspapers, Moʻolelo, Hawaii is the exact path that they took. They cut out breadfruit trees, they laid down lauhala mats, put down ili, and they carried her to Mokuʻula and her mother, and they buried her at Mokuʻula, Nahiana Ana. Right?
What was the date?
I don't remember the exact date. I can get it to you. It's April 1837.
What did they do? They just let the body decay?
No. I don't know. Tama would probably know. But they had methods of preservation,
Okay.
like salt and things like that. Yeah. But I'm not saying it was a pretty sight, but and he ended up staying there by her at Mokuʻula for most of the remainder of his life. He will move to Honolulu in 1850. Well, he moves in 45. The capital of Hawaii becomes Honolulu in 1850. A lot of people have given different dates, but the Privy Council records say 1850. Okay, so it's Lahaina, the capital of the kingdom, till 1850, and then it's Honolulu. The sacred pa'u was extraordinary not only as a piece of post-contact Hawaiian art, but also in religious, political, and historical significance. Kanaka Maoli of the early 19th century had lived in these islands of Hawaii for nearly 2 millennium, and were now seeing the most fundamental structures of their society challenged as they sought to cope with the effects of Western contact and introduced diseases, religion, and social structure. At this time of tremendous change, turmoil, and death, the feather pa'u was created by the people of Lahaina in 1823 for their most high ali'i Nahiana Ana. And I'm not going to read you this whole thing. 2.5 feet, o'o bird, extraordinary in culture and context. Now, why is it like this today? We don't know. Somebody cut it and turned it this way, so now it's 10 feet by 5 feet. My guess, my educated guess, is that it was Kauikioli saying it's not going to serve its purpose, and therefore no one will ever wear it again. It was Nahiana Ana's. That's my assumption, but we don't know. It was used as a funeral cover for all of the next mo'i through Liliuokalani. If you look at photographs of Liliuokalani's funeral, this covers her casket, right? So that was Nahiana Ana, Keopuolani, Lahaina. We had one image of Nahiana Ana. You've probably seen it, black and white, with her brother and so forth. David Forbes discovered this about 8 years ago in Australia. A private collector had it and didn't know what it was. It's a new painting of Nahiana Ana that was done in October of 1836, which means it was a month after the loss of her child and 2 months before she passed. But that's a painting of Nahiana Ana at that period. Okay, here's her funeral. Nahiana Ana. She was actually 21. I'll give you another historiography piece. I first looked at this, of course, 20 years ago when I was just starting out with Hawaiian. I looked at the funeral of Nahiana Ana, and it's in the English papers. So that's what I used, because that's all I could read. It's in the Hawaiian Gazette, but it's different. And who starts the funeral, who leads the funeral of the most sacred woman, Nahiana Ana, in the English language press? Who do you think leads the funeral? The missionaries. The Hawaiian language newspaper has the same diagram, but it says, Okikai Poi Koa Mamua, Hawaiian warriors. Ona Kahuna Lapa'au Mai, Hawaiian priest, and then the missionaries. So something as small as that, difference of who led there's people have written whole PhDs on where did you stand next to the king and so forth. English language source is going to tell you the missionaries led the funeral. Hawaiian language source is going to tell you, no, it was Hawaiian warriors. This one was written by Reuben Tinker, who presided over the funeral. So I'm tending to believe him. Yeah, but the type of thing that you're not going to find out unless you read the Hawaiian sources. Okay, we're getting there. Moku'ula Mokunia. I did that. Okay, let's go over here. Okay, 1902, Mo'i Kamehameha Pae and Peleliu. So Kamehameha sets up his base of his kingdom in Lahaina with his Peleliu fleet, his fleet of warrior canoes. They set it straight. If you know Maui, they set his fleet stacked next to each other. You could walk from one to the other, stretched from Malo Wharf to Olowalu. They said it was about 800 canoes. So he sets up his kingdom here. Kauikioli, Kamehameha III, sets up his place here. Ke'aha Ali'i. So they built this place called Piula, which is today at Kamehameha Iki Park, just on the north side of the 505 Front Street. They built this as the first legislature of the Kingdom of Hawaii, right? This is Moku'ula. This is kind of the Western law place, because what happened? Kamehameha III declares Hawaii a constitutional monarchy, and they build a constitution. Now understand this, super important to understand. I was taught 20 years ago, 25 years ago at Kamakaku, and everyone learns as we go along. Everyone's trying to reach the truth. I was taught Western Haole brought this Western system and imposed it on Kauikeoli and convinced him to do this horrible thing, which was change Hawaii from the way it was to a Western style of constitution. Not true. You start to read Kauikeoli's writings. You start to read all the other elite writings in Hawaii at the time. What he did was brilliant, and it was his own idea. He decided, he knew that that the Pacific was being taken over. The Spanish had already taken the Marquesas. The Germans were looking at Samoa. Hawaii was the most strategic island in the middle of the Pacific, geographically. It was right between America and Asia. It was going to be taken. There's zero question that Hawaii would have become a foreign country if something hadn't been done. Kauikeoli understands he has to build a nation that those other nations will respect and recognize. It's super going to be hard, but it's the only chance you got to save your people and save your land. And so he does. One of my PhD areas is world history. I have never heard of another example in the world where an absolute monarch, understand he was divine. Anything he wanted was his. Anything that existed he owned. And he gives that up. He voluntarily gives up 2/3 of his power to create a constitutional monarchy that has an executive branch, a judicial branch, and a legislative branch, and he's going to let his people vote. That's incredibly progressive. And he did it because he wanted to save his kingdom. So they set up an 1840 constitution that creates branches of government and so forth. It creates voting. It creates a court, district courts, police courts, circuit courts, Supreme Court, right? And the Constitution says the Kuhina Nui, which is the co-regent, will sit on the Supreme Court. Okay? So the Kuhina Nui at the time of 1840 was Kekauluʻohi, a powerful woman ali'i, right? Wait a minute. So Hawaii had a woman Supreme Court justice in 1840. What was the first woman Supreme Court justice in the United States? Sandra Day O'Connor in 1981. You need to understand that. 140 years prior to the first woman ever becoming part of the United States Supreme Court, a Hawaiian was sitting on her Supreme Court. 140 years prior. And women were also governors of the islands, and they were legislators, and they were nobles. Women had positions of power in the Hawaiian government more than a century before they ever did in the United States. Yeah? Okay, Kubukanawai Luaʻehu. This was called the Luaʻehu Constitution because it was literally written there. This incredible document, this Constitution. Oh, another side note, it was written Moʻolelo Hawaiʻi. It was discussed Moʻolelo Hawaiʻi. Yeah? The English version that we have that everyone quotes as the Constitution came 2 years later. They made a translation up at Lahaina Luna. If you want to quote the 1840 Constitution, it's Moʻolelo Hawaiʻi, right? Okay, there it is right there. Okay, Kumu Kanawai, Amaina Kanawai, o ko Hawaii pai ʻāina, right? 1840. Hawaii's founding constitution, drafted, debated, and signed at Luaʻehu i Kamaluʻulolele, Lahaina, Maui. Transitioned from absolute monarchy to a constitutional monarchy. Adopted by Kekauluʻohi ame Kauikeoli. Everyone says, I still hear it from my friends as historians say, oh, Kauikeoli passed this law in 1842. No, he didn't. Kauikeoli and Kekauluʻohi passed that law. Nothing could pass and become law without the signature of the co-regent, Kekauluʻohi, right? Okay, here's Kamehameha III. Lived, governed from Mokuʻula till 1845. I mentioned that. This is, now talking about commerce, there's a saying about Lahaina that is, Ka'ulula'au makai, right? The forest towards the ocean, which meant they were talking about the whaling ships. All the masts of the whaling ships were so lined up, they looked like a forest, right? Hundreds and hundreds of whaling ships. So Lahaina was the central place of commerce. Now here's a fact that I even have a hard time believing because it's just so astounding. How many different types of money do you think were exchanged in Lahaina in the 1850s? Different types. There's English and American and Spanish. And how many types of money were exchanged in Lahaina in 1850s? 152. I didn't even know there were that many types of money, right? We've got the governing, they put out a pamphlet and they say these are the legal tenders in Lahaina. 152 different currencies. Russian and African and That's what an international place of commerce Lahaina was. Okay, ships were there. Okay, here we go. So this is when the kingdom actually moved. So when somebody quotes you 1840 something, here's the actual Privy Council. At the Privy Council held yesterday, it's pleased His Majesty the King to declare Honolulu to be a city and the capital of his kingdom, August 30th, 1850. Okay, and this is a newspaper, but then the primary source is right there, which is my Apple eye photo shot of the original Privy Council meeting minutes. Resolved that Honolulu is declared to be a city and the capital of the Hawaiian Islands, 1850. Okay, yes. Okay. Sorry. Okay, so now the spiritual side. So what I want to talk about is Wailuku Church. I'm not Christian, but I am biased. That's my favorite church place in the world. The people are amazing. That started by Keopuolani in 1823. In 1893, January 17th, the Queen was overthrown, right? Many of those folks, not all, many of those folks were descendants of the missionaries. They weren't missionaries. Missionaries had passed away years before. The mission, honestly, was about bringing the Word of God to Hawaii. In the 1860s, when the folks in Boston said, you did it, they declare officially Hawaii as a Christian nation, unlike any other nation in the world, equal to Christians of New England. They declare that in 1863. And they say, you did your job, awesome. Now come home. The sons of the mission and the grandsons of the mission had gotten pastorships, and they'd gotten jobs, and they'd gotten sugar companies, and they're doing kind of well. And they're like, I don't know if I want to step down. Yeah? And that's when greed entered the picture. And not all, but many of the sons of the mission changed the mission at that point to become one of taking over the country. It wasn't the missionaries. Hawaiians even knew this. In my dissertation, which hopefully will become a book soon, there's a guy named William Abraham Kiha, who is a native pastor, who says, we don't need them anymore. We mahalo binamu, guys, for bringing us the Word of God. Their sons and grandsons have become apostates. Hawaiians were saying, we know God, we know Christianity, and you're not being Christian. To Sanford Dole, Lauren Thurston, and those sons of the mission who bastardized the mission. And so this struggle starts to happen. They overthrow the Queen. The next day, on the 18th of January, 1893, at Waine'e Church in Lahaina, the congregation comes together and says, we're going to fight for the Queen. We're going to have prayer fast meetings. Okay, we're going to have prayer fast meetings at the church every day, praying for the restoration of the Queen and the continued independence of our nation. Now, the board, the Society of Hawaiian Christians across Hawaii had 40,000 native Hawaiian Christians across the islands. The board in Honolulu that was all white was 11 men. And that administration, who had been involved in the overthrow, tells the pastors to preach annexation and preach against the Queen. Most refuse, but not all. Some pastors, they want to keep their jobs, they want to save their family, I got to pay my bills, blah, blah, blah. And some really believed it. Some pastors, I found 13 different case studies, some pastors come out and say they preach against the Queen and they preach pro-annexation. And in every single case, the church congregation rises up and kicks them out of the pulpit. And not only kicks them out of the pulpit, kicks them out of the halikahu and says, you're not going to be on our property anymore. That started at Lahaina Church. The congregation is 93 people at Lahaina at the time, right? 93 people. I've got all these original records. They come to the church, they have a meeting, they pass a resolution kicking Reverend Adam Polly out of the pulpit for his pro-annexation. He's become the president of the Annexation Club of Maui. It's kind of like rubbing it in their face. And they said, no, you're not going to be our pastor anymore, and you have till July 30th to get out of the halikahu. He writes letters to Albert Francis Judd, who's the head of the church and the head part of the provisional government, and says, help me. What am I going to do? These are all in Hawaiian at Bishop Museum. He says, what am I going to do? And Judd says, don't worry about it, I'll take care of it. Judd sends a commission that he appoints to Lahaina to solve this problem. They meet at the church. They declare that Polly is pastor once again, and they excommunicate every member of the church who signed that petition. So Lahaina Church supposedly goes from 93 members to 7. Now, they couldn't do that. The church was incorporated under Hawaiian Kingdom law in 1872, and it spelled out exactly how you get rid of pastors, exactly how you get rid of trustees, and it was a membership vote. He created a committee that had no power, but they do it and they pretend like it happens. There's a fight at the church, people are arrested, there's a court case, and the newspaper comes out and calls Wailuku Church Ke Kukui Ona Akalesia, the light of the churches. Across the islands, this becomes an idea. And they say we must do what the Lahaina folks did, and that is stand up against this hevel. And Christian Hawaiians around the country stand up and say, we are Christian, we know Christianity, you're not being Christian. And they claim God and they claim their churches. Yeah? First newspaper in the Pacific, done at Lahaina, yeah? Lahaina Luna Seminary. Okay, one more thing I want to show you, and then I'll finish up, I promise. Lahaina Luna Seminary. You girls look like really smart girls, so you might be able to do this. I'm a professional writer. I couldn't do what they were doing back at Lahaina Luna in the 1870s. I want to show you something. These are student essays that were done at Lahaina Luna in the 1880s. First of all, they were studying geography, the oceans of the world, the seas of the world, the rivers of the world, the Mulivai, Alabama. Like they knew that there was a river in Alabama. The Cape Fear, Connecticut, Columbia, the Ganges. You know, they were studying world geography like it was like just insanely. This is a English paper from Richard Pelikai, 16 years old, from Wailuku, Maui. And he says, as Egypt is annually overflowed by the Nile, it is a very rich country. Analysis. There is a, oh, here, I'll read it here. This is a, you know, he says, this is a complex second-person subject narrative, da, 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 and he goes on for 2 pages. I literally have no idea what he's talking about. And understand, this is a Hawaiian kid from Wailuku, 16 years old doing this in his second language, right? He's a Hawaiian writing this incredible analysis of English grammar in English. That's what was going on at Lahaina Luna. Trigonometry, right? From David Makaivi at 17 years old. You know, just again and again and again. This is the cemetery at Moku at Wailuku Church as it stands today. Keopolani's burial, Nahianana's, and many others. Now, so they were at Moku'ula by order of Pauahi Bishop in circa 1883. She said, I want to bring the Ali'i bones back together and have them all safe. And so she ordered them moved from Moku'ula to the Christian cemetery up at Wailuku. And Mrs. Shaw and others talk about it, and there's this really chicken skin description of what happened. They started at midnight and went on from there, and they moved the bodies up to the Christian church. So what will the future of Moku'ula be? That's our big question. I want to finish with this quote, okay? And I'm sorry for going so long, but I'm finishing up here, and I ask your question so you can win a book. Okay, this is an African writer named Ben Okri, and he said, you know, this is why I do my work. He said this quote, he said, in a fractured age, when cynicism is God, here's a possible heresy. We live by stories. We also live in them. One way or another, we are living the stories planted in us early or along the way. Or we are also living the stories we planted, knowingly or unknowingly, in ourselves. We live stories that either give our lives meaning or negate it with meaninglessness. If we change the stories we live by, quite possibly we can change our lives. Yeah? Mahalo. Mahalo. Okay. Raise your hand. Don't scream it out. Raise your hand if you know what year the first Constitution was created in Hawaii.
1819?
No, close.
1840.
1840. Good job. Good job. Good job. Enjoy that.
Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
We're going to go pretty soon to get your little trees that you ordered. You can pay for it on your own. But I have a few minutes. We got such rich mana'o from Mr. Williams, and I want you to turn and talk. I want you to just discuss with each other what were the key things you took away, some key points. Can you just turn and talk with your neighbor? What really struck you or what really intrigued you? Oh, you have questions, first of all. You have
Yes.
questions.
Yes. So yes, so the question is, what's the difference between a Christian and a Hawaiian Christian? In my mana'o, absolutely nothing. A Christian is a Christian, right? What I'll tell you is this, and this I know. From reading thousands of pages and letters of your kapuna who were Christian, I can tell you, they thought of themselves as Christian and no less Hawaiian. And that's a problem that's happened. That came up in the 1920s, right? I asked Dr. Charlot about this, like, when did the churches become the place you don't talk about this stuff? Because it used to be the place you talked about this stuff, right? And that idea, and I've seen it at school, when Dr. Haunani Trask retired. I'm not going to go into the long story, but she took me under her wing unbelievably for some odd reason. She called me her bolo-headed haole boy. and when she retired, she asked me to teach her class, her sovereignty class. The rest of the faculty didn't want that to happen, but she said so, so I did for one semester before they took it away. But I taught that class, and every time I brought up the idea of Christianity in Hawaii, everybody fought me. Absolutely not. You can't be both things. And that came from a new understanding. Your kapuna were absolutely Christian and no less Hawaiian. Yeah, I had a professor when I gave my first talk at Wailuku Church. I had a professor come up to me and say quietly, he said, "Ron, so," he's like, "So you think Hawaiians were more Christian or more Hawaiian?" Like, right, you didn't even listen to talk. like they didn't make that distinction. That was a problem for us today. Yeah? Okay.
Wow.
Other question?
Any more questions? That was a great question.
Yeah. Mahalo.
What do you